Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Judi Glova. Today is day 3 of the Burnout Solutions series, and I've collected some of the best experts for you to teach you about how to have your own burnout solution. So I'm excited because today is all about authenticity, how to stop proving your worth and own your value to be seen, heard, and respected. And I also want to remind you that we are meeting every day throughout this online series in our Facebook group called the More Than Enough Women Circle. I'll be live in the evening, so don't miss our daily recap and highlights. Plus, I'll be able to answer any questions that you have. I want to make sure that you can take action on the tools and skills you learn each day. So if you haven't already, head over to the More Than Enough Women Circle. Okay, everybody, so now let's kick things off with Megan Fenyo. And she is an expert who is a licensed clinical social worker, transformation mindset coach, and best-selling author. She has her best-selling book recently released called You Are Enough, 5 Steps to Move from Struggle to Strength, that made a #1 news release. So we are going to kick things off, and we're going to focus on the You Are Enough, 5 steps to more from burnout to strength. Megan, I have to tell you, I really love what you do. And my first question for you is, from your point of view and from the businesswomen that you work with, how do you think, or why do you think that stress and burnout is such an epidemic these days?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm very, very excited to be here. And this question is something that I deal with so much in my personal life and also with clients that I work with, because stress is the #1 thing that causes anxiety and causes our limiting beliefs and keeps us stuck. And I think, honestly, the answer is really simple. It's that we don't do enough self-care. We take care of everyone else before we do the things that we need to do for ourselves. And so I know when I am not doing self-care every single day, even if it's for 15 minutes, the stress for me is overwhelming. And I'm not sleeping well and I'm irritated. So I definitely think it's just the self-care part of it.
Yeah, it's like we don't get to fill our own bucket, right? So we're constantly drawing from this empty bucket.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, is there a story that you can share with us in terms of, what you have in your book and, what it is or how you have helped people specifically when it comes to the burnout to be able to really break through?
Definitely. Like you had said, my book is called, You Are Enough, 5 Steps to Move from Struggle to Strength. And I talk in the book about my personal journey of, trauma and tragedy and how I was able to move from that struggle into my strength. And I was actually using these 5 steps personally in my life when I was writing this book. Mm-hmm. And the chapter that sticks out for me in regards to what you and I are talking about today is step 4 in my 5-step system, which is creating your strength plan, and really what that focuses on. And so I have done this in my personal life. I've done it with all of my clients. So we individualize a strength plan. So what does that include? That includes self-care. That includes time management. That includes, all of these things broken down by day. And that is one of the biggest tools, because what I always tell my clients is we have all of these things that we have to do during a day, but there has to be at least one thing in your day that you want to do. Otherwise, life becomes this mediocre, same old thing every single day. And so in the strength plan, I have them get a planner and we divide it by every half hour, because we wake up in the morning and we think, oh my gosh, I have all these emails and I've got this and that. And when we can literally visualize a planner in front of us, we can see, yeah, I have a really busy day, but I have a half hour here, or I have an hour here, instead of catastrophizing and say, oh my goodness, there's just not enough time in the day. That is where our stress comes from and the overwhelm. Mm-hmm. And so I definitely think that that's a powerful chapter and a powerful tool that I use with my clients. And again, everything is individualized, but we go step by step from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. and definitely putting that self-care in, and what is that going to look like?
Yeah, well, I totally buy into that practice. I actually do it every day, and it's actually only 20 minutes, and I'll tell you why. But every morning I go out and I run my puppy, and she's got really short legs, so it's not a whole half an hour. We make at least 20 minutes until
Yeah.
she gets totally tired. But yeah, I always fill my bucket first in the first part of the day, because then I feel like I've done something for me. And the
Mm-hmm.
rest of the day, I'm giving to people from that place of fullness, as opposed to like, oh my God, I'm depleted. I don't even have anything to draw from.
Right.
So give me an example, or can you give me an example of one of your clients or your coaching clients that you've been able to work with that have really shown to have a significant difference when they've worked with the fourth step?
Definitely. I have a lot of examples, but I really think the one that stands out to me the most is, a mother that came to me that just was really overwhelmed and stressed, and she just couldn't figure out why she wasn't happy. And she works full time, and her husband works full time, and she's got kids, and she felt that she was really dealing with severe depression. And I wouldn't say it was severe, but it was enough to say simply, where are you taking care of yourself? And she's like, I don't know. Like, I don't have time for that. And so we slowly developed. So it's a very slow process because you don't want to overwhelm yourself. So we started little by little with a morning routine for her and scheduled. And it doesn't have to be long. If you have 15 minutes, that's perfect. If you have an hour one day and 20 minutes the next, that is totally okay. And so we started this very small. And the one thing that I told her is, and she tells me this all the time, it's what you said that makes me get up in the morning. I always give the analogy of when you're in an airplane, and I'm sure you've seen this, when the mask comes down, what do they say when they're doing the safety demonstration?
Right. Put it on yourself first. Right.
Right. You have to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. And I think for her, hearing that was a very big eye-opening experience because she wants to be the best mother and the best wife that she can be. And so we developed this very small morning routine that she does every morning. And it has just lifted this weight off her. So where now we can really look at, okay, so what do you want in life? Like, what are you visualizing? What is your passion and your purpose? Because it was that little piece of self-care where she wasn't able to start manifesting this life that she wanted.
Great. And I love that example because it's the little tiny things that we do that make the big difference, right? It's like when they say it's like make a, if a plane, go back to the plane scenario, it's like if a pilot changes by 1 degree and changes the trajectory of the airplane, where it will actually eventually end up way off its target if it doesn't readjust. So I love that it's also a daily thing. It's a practice. It's something that you get. It's a habit, right? We actually want to create really good habits that helps us sustain our ability to, keep out of burnout and actually be more in that place of inner peace and, just being able to be really productive. But here's another thing I just want to let everybody know that I absolutely love about you is that this book that you wrote was so inspired by your own story. And I really, really want you, Megan, to tell us as much as you can about your story and about how, how there are certain parts in that where I'm sure you were feeling like so stressed out and so depleted. So can you just share that with us a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. And when you said that, I'm like, how much time do we have? No, I'm just joking. I'll make it a very short version because it's very detailed in the book. But basically, I was married in 2013 and my ex-husband had an affair for 14 months of our 2.5-year marriage. I was an officer in the Air Force, so I'd just gotten out of the Air Force and, was trying to get back into, my mental health work. And long story short, I realized that in the midst of all of this, I was in a very, very toxic, narcissistic, abusive relationship. And even as a therapist, I didn't realize that I was in this. And so every single time all of this abusive love bombing and gaslighting, and I go into all of that in the book, happened, I literally felt like I wasn't enough. When he had an affair, he blamed me. And I was like on the floor bawling. There was days where I couldn't get out of bed, and I'm a therapist, right? So I always just felt like I wasn't enough. And the stress of that emotional trauma took everything out on physically. I stopped doing self-care. I stopped working out. I dropped a ton of weight, unhealthy way of dropping weight. I was not effective as a friend, as a therapist, because I let the weight of that stress and the anxiety and everything take me out. And so long story short, we got divorced in 2016, but his love bombing and gaslighting continued for 2 years, to the point where I stayed faithful and committed to him, because he had just been in my mind and like literally making me think that like all of this was my fault and that I couldn't live without him. And so in February, something else happened, which I talk about in the book, and I broke free. And I had started writing my book 2 weeks before this event happened. So when I say that I literally was in the midst of trauma, of closure, of all of that, that's exactly where that book was born. And I started writing it in February of this year and finished it Memorial weekend. So just in the midst of it. And so it was such a healing journey for me, because it wasn't some program that I developed off the whim. It was something that I developed while I was in the midst of it. So I know that it works. I know that it works for my clients, because when we're not taking care of ourselves, the stress, of the emotional and the physical stress will just literally take us out.
Right. Yeah. And again, what I love about your vulnerability, and thank you for that, for sharing your story with us, because the key points also that I want to call out are, we don't even notice. I mean, like you said, you're a therapist and you didn't even notice that you were in a traumatic, a trauma relationship, a trauma-inducing relationship, and one that was narcissistic abuse. Is that how you say it?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah. So the thing is that I really want our women to know that if you're in one of these relationships where it's like in that crazy making, that can actually contribute to the stress that you're feeling. So it's like when you're living through this, relationship of second guessing yourself, and you start doubting yourself so much. And if that is, your consistent way of being, my gosh, think of how much a relationship can draw and drain your energy. And I think what you point out, Megan, again, which I think is so brilliant, is how we can be mindful of what's going on in our lives, and not just, putting up with it and, just sustaining what is, because maybe it's really not healthy for us. Maybe the choices that we're making are really not healthy. So I think that, your message is so valuable for everybody. And I love your book in terms of, more than, being enough. A lot of what I tell my clients also is about, you're more than enough. It's really just getting that sense of feeling like we're enough. And yeah, I think that's such a key lesson for so many of the women. And I'm just curious too, is there any tips that you have for women that maybe, or are there any questions that women should be asking themselves to determine whether or not they're in one of those trauma relationships, or if they're in a narcissistic, abusive relationship?
There definitely are. And, I talk about in the book and with my clients, focusing on, are you feeling stuck in relationships, career, health, right? Because just like you were saying, the things that we're saying to ourselves is not necessarily because we believe them. It's because someone is telling that to us. So I thought I was crazy. He made me feel like I was crazy because everything was my fault. And when it comes, narcissistic abuse is becoming more aware. There's more awareness coming about this. And I think I have met, even just in the 3.5 weeks that my book has been out, I've had so many women and even men come to me and say, thank you so much for this, because I thought I was crazy, or I've had this same experience. And so honestly, it's really hard to know that you're in it. But I think making sure that your mind is healthy and you're doing mindfulness stuff, which I talk about in my book, because relationships are the number one reason for stress, for addiction, for just all types of, like health issues, because that's who we're around all the time. And so, question yourself, like, how are you feeling at the end of each day? Who is writing your story? So what I like to say is that I allowed my ex-husband to write my story for the last 6 years. I allowed what he told me to make me believe that I was not enough. Career-wise, I was really successful, but personal life was not. And so I allowed him to write that story for me. So I always ask my clients, who's writing your story for you? Are you letting your past, things that you can no longer control, keep you stuck believing that you're not enough right now? And if it is, who's telling you things? And sometimes they'll say, well, it's my husband or my boyfriend or my wife or a friend. Okay, so then we need to look at that.
Or a boss, right?
Yeah, or a boss.
Be a boss, a client, right?
Yeah. So then we focus on that relationship and figuring out if it's abusive or toxic. And if it is, do you want it to stay? And like, how do you work through this and all of this? So it's really like having them be mindful of what they're telling themselves and who is telling it to them. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it can just be our mind. It's just, we need those skills, right? It might not be anyone telling it to us except ourselves. But 9 times out of 10, it's, when they look into that and they start discovering that, they find out that it's someone in their life.
Right. And I want to point out two key things that you said about, I want people to remember these because these are really golden nuggets is, who is telling your story, right? Is it self-focused or is it other-focused? Is someone else writing the story and telling you who you are, or are you telling you who you are? Because to me, being self-focused is that powerful, I call it rebar. Like most people don't know. My dad was in construction. So like rebar is all about, what's inside concrete when they make something. So it makes it stronger, right? So it's like when you have really strong rebar internally, like who you are and nobody can tell you who you are, that to me is like, that's the strength that you're talking about. That's like how you build that strength. And then the other piece that you were talking about relationships being the number one source of stress, and it's true. It can be your romantic relationships. It can be your work relationships. It can be people at work telling you who they think you are. And then I think the third thing that I would point out that I just realized is that, yeah, you know what? Sometimes even that voice in our head, where did that voice come from? Mm-hmm. Right? Was that voice started when you were little? And, because sometimes even that little voice inside of us can be telling us a story that isn't ours. Right. So so I love that you mentioned that. So can you actually tell a little bit about that voice inside our head when it comes from, our childhood or something like that? Can you kind of expand on that a little?
Yes. So I do a lot of inner child work with some of my clients because I was a product of exactly what you're talking about. So one of the favorite theories, I guess, which I'm not a theory person, but that I like in therapy is called the family systems model. And basically what the family system model is, it says that no matter what you experience from the minute you are born, whether it be good, bad, ugly, whether it be physical, emotional, whatever, that shapes who you are as a person. And so I grew up in a very dysfunctional, abusive home, and I was the middle child. So I was always taking care of my younger sister, trying not to cause an issue in the family. I have a learning disability, so I never got good grades. So I think unconsciously, although my parents loved me and we went to a Christian school and all of this stuff, behind closed doors, there's a lot of other stuff going on with my mom. And so I think unconsciously I had already started believing that I was not enough. I wasn't enough like my sister who got good grades and all of this stuff. And that drove me career-wise to get where I am. Like my guidance counselor told me in high school, told me and my parents that I should never go to college because I was never going to graduate. And that voice in my head made me feel like I was dumb, made me feel like I wasn't good enough. But for me, it was the push that I needed. Right. It was the push that I needed to get my master's and to write this book and all of this stuff. But again, it was all of these things that we were told. And when I work with clients and I say, okay, give me a few situations that stick out in your mind. One of them for me was I was in a bathroom when I was in middle school, and I walked in and all my girlfriends were in there, and I never had really good self-esteem. And I never felt like they were like my true friends. And I walked in there and we didn't have enough money to go on spring break. And they were all in there comparing their tans. And I remember the morning I put on a ton of makeup to look like I went somewhere. And I walked in and they were talking about me. And they made me feel super bad. Like, no, you just have a ton of makeup on. What? You don't have enough money to go on spring break. And I thought they were my friends.
Mm-hmm.
Even that little story made me start having trust issues, right? I
Right.
always thought it was from like growing up, but it was even this little story of they're supposed to be my friends, but they're talking about me.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started doing my own therapy, you know, with a therapist and getting into like learning all about these mindset things, I was able to close the chapter of my life because I was letting all of these people and these negative things control me.
Mm-hmm.
And once I did that, there was just kind of this freedom, and my mom and I have a good relationship, and you know, all of this stuff. But then again, I stopped doing self-care once I found out about my ex-husband's affair. And I just allowed my mind to play these tricks on me. I allowed him to tell me these stories because I was so emotionally exhausted that I didn't take care of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really learning those tips and those tricks from how to close stuff that happened in your childhood or in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, so that you don't remain stuck, so that you can continue to work on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, I have a lot of personal experience in that arena of inner child work and what we tell each other, tell
Yeah.
ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you and I share a similar story. I mean, I also had one of those families where it came at me from many different directions in terms of people telling me who they thought I was and what they thought I could do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also curious because I can tell there must have been something in you, or maybe I'm just projecting it onto you, but I knew there was always this like little rebel voice inside my head that said, "Oh yeah, well let me show you what I can do." So there was always this, maybe not rebar, but there was definitely some structure of strength inside of me that I was able to tap into. But like you said, it's like if you don't get, somebody to support you to really look at what are the messages that are playing, what are the stories, and they may be things that you're like, oh, that doesn't matter. That's not contributing to my stress. And it's like, well, maybe it is, because those stories that you're telling yourself are actually limiting beliefs or somehow sabotaging the success that you truly could have. And maybe you are super successful because of it, but at what cost?
Right.
Right? Like, do you just go, totally full out until you drop because that's what you think you have to do in order to prove your worth? Right? That's why this whole section today is all about authenticity and stop proving our worth, but owning our value.
Mm-hmm.
And owning our value comes from the inside out. Someone else can never, ever tell us what our value is. And that's what you're talking about. And that's why, again, your journey, when you and I first connected and we just knew, like, wow, I really have to interview you because we just had so much in common. And I love that you put it, that you dedicated your time and focus and got your book written and out there for everybody else to really benefit from. So I'm just thrilled that you were able to do that. And obviously going through that journey, again, the other point that I want everybody to remember is that everything that happens since you're born is for you. It's for you to, go beyond, and it makes you who you are, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that victim mentality. So just one more question about, the whole victim mentality thing and how in a trauma situation, right, you can really start feeling, you can get stuck in being a victim, right?
Oh, definitely. And I actually talk about this with my clients. There's 4 subpersonalities that lead to stress and anxiety. And one of them is the victim mentality, and the words that come in the victim is, I'm not this, I'm not this. Whereas like the perfectionist subpersonality is, I should have done this, I need to do this, I have to do this. And so the victim, definitely, because we're not being authentic. We're not taking responsibility for, you know, what we can control. We want to blame the situation or the person because our mind, unfortunately, has been programmed to be negative. And it's the craziest thing. But if you think about it, that's all we know is how to be negative. And so the work really comes on how to change that into positive. And so the victim mentality, I think for me, I look back at my experience, and I think obviously I was playing the victim role for a bit, like, oh, woe is me, you know, all of this. But I loved what you said about the values, because I allowed him to take away all of my values of who I was. And in the book, I talk about rediscovering my top 3 values and using them as a coping skill. So when I'm having a difficult mindset, or I'm not sure about a behavior or a decision, I say, is this behavior, is this thought honoring my values of authenticity, integrity, and honesty? And for me, that has been a new coping skill that I've developed, because when I'm sitting here thinking that I'm not enough and struggling and allowing my mind to go into that victim mode, that is not living in integrity. That is not being authentic and being honest with myself, because honestly, I know that I'm enough. I know that I'm a good person. And so when I allow myself to go there, it's not honoring my values.
Again, I just love how you say things. And I love the fact that you were talking about being honest with yourself is so important to you, because, and again, I can admit this, that there was times that I would just lie to myself. And it was sometimes unconscious. Like, I just thought I was telling myself, like, oh, you know, that's okay. It's all right. You know, and I'd make excuses. I call my, when I'm telling myself a story, sometimes I'm giving myself excuses. And it's like that also just creates so much stress, because when you're not being honest with yourself, it's like, your higher self knows what the truth is and who the truth of who you are is. And when you're lying to yourself and you're trying to make excuses about how you're behaving or how you're allowing other people to treat you. But I love the top 3 values, because it always steers you back to who you are. And it just reinforces that rebar right inside to be able to say, this is who I am. No, actually, this is who I am. And one of the key lessons, actually, even that I learned when, dealing with gaslighting, when people are trying to tell you that you're not who you are, or, oh, that didn't happen, is just a phrase of saying, well, actually, and then da 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 da, like really correcting what the mistake is. Because when we nod our heads, and this is something that women do unconsciously more than men. I don't know if you knew that or not. Women we nod our heads, and men think that we're agreeing with them.
Yeah. But we're not. We're usually not.
We're just hearing them, right? But the thing is that even physically, when we nod our heads, somehow unconsciously, we're telling people that we agree with them. Yeah. And physically we are. So it's like, how can we say, well, actually, this is what I meant, or actually, no, that's not true. Because every time that we let someone else define who we are, we're lying to ourselves, and that's not fair.
Yes. Exactly right. I loved everything that you just said. And as you're saying, I'm noticing that I'm nodding my head, and I'm like this, and I'm like that. But yeah, I completely agree. And what I always like to point out is that everyone's entitled to their feelings and their thoughts. We don't always have to accept them, but we have to respect them. And so, yeah, just saying, I understand, or I acknowledge what you're feeling, but actually, blah, 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 right? So like you're still, because that helps like take out some of the arguments and things like that, is when you're saying, I acknowledge what you're feeling, I may not agree with it, but I'm respecting you because I know that's how you feel. And so I always try to remember that too, and teach my clients that is that everyone's entitled to their thoughts and feelings, but we don't have to agree with them, but we have to respect them.
Beautiful. Yeah. Because I think definitely respect is such an important foundational thing. And you found, have that way of fine tuning what I said. So that's great. I love that. That little tweak it just makes it even better. You're right. Being able to acknowledge people's thoughts and feelings and making them feel heard and seen. but also being seen and heard ourselves. And as women, again, it's really important for us to speak up and be seen and heard, because so many times we're told that we're too loud or we're too this or too that.
Yes.
So yeah, I just am curious about one more thing about, you mentioned that there were 4 different ones, and you mentioned the victim and the perfectionist.
Yeah.
So what were the other 2?
The other 2 is the worrier, and it sounds like warrior, but worrier, worrier. And that is basically like the what ifs. So it's the future tripping. So it can cause a ton of stress by saying, well, what if this happens? So it takes away from our ability to live in the moment, because we don't know what's going to happen in the next hour, let alone the next week or the next year. And so like I had a client last week, and she came in and she was super anxious and stressed out. And I said, what's going on? And she's like, well, what if I don't get into this college next year? What if this happens? And I said, what you can do now is focus on today and say, today I'm going to school so that I can get into this school next year. Instead of saying, what if I don't, it's stopping you from what you're doing today. And so we've got the worrier, we've got the
perfectionist, the
victim, and oh my goodness, what's the last one? The critic. So I'm definitely the perfectionist, but I do go between all of them, and that's totally okay. But I'm the perfectionist of, I should have done this, I have to do this, I need to do this, and it causes a lot of stress. And the last one is the critic. So I'm not good enough, I'm not healthy enough, I'm not strong enough. Everything that we do is wrong. It's not good enough. And this can definitely come up in work, definitely with like comparing ourselves to maybe our coworker or our boss, or definitely in relationships, that I'm not good enough to be in this circle, or, you know, be in this group. And so the 4th one is the critic. And all of these subpersonalities cause a ton of stress and a ton of anxiety.
Wow. Well, I have to say, I definitely think I've done all 4 of them at some point in my life. But I also think that, you know, I recognize them, but I like how you literally clarified, like, here are the 4 different messages that we can be sending ourselves. And we may have one that's more predominant than another one. And I think that is going to be so valuable for everybody that's listening, because that is gold. That is so gold, because it can fire off that light bulb in our head of like, oh, that's what I'm saying to myself. Oh, I'm in victim mode right now, or I'm in critic mode, or I'm in perfectionist mode. Or worrier mode. Oh my gosh. I loved how you were saying it's future tripping.
Future tripping. We don't want a future trip, because it takes away from what we're doing today to get us to the life that we want. But yes, future tripping is definitely a mental health term. So we use that a lot as therapists.
Yeah, I've definitely done future tripping of like, what if this happens? And it's like, oh, come on, 99% of the stuff that we worry about just never happens. And you know, the other 1% is usually, you know, some of that is stuff that we can deal with. So yeah, I mean, I am just so grateful, Megan, because you have given us, I mean, literally, I have a whole page of notes and key messages here that I hope everybody else has been taking notes too. But it has been so amazing to talk to you. But okay, one last question though.
Yes.
What's the one thing, because we've covered so much today, what's the one thing that you want women to remember of our conversation today?
It's just simply this, and I speak all over, and I do a lot of interviews like this, and so I give the same message over and over, because I truly want everyone that listens to these interviews and this summit to remember that every single one of us, that you are enough. No matter what season you are in, just as you are. And the more you celebrate and focus on that, the more you will move into your strength.
I love that. I love that so much. Thank you, Megan. And I want to remind everybody that her free gift is right below. Make sure that you click on that. And then I actually have a few more reminders. Okay, everybody, you know, if you haven't also just purchased your Backstage Pass, if you don't have that yet, you also have that opportunity. And if you do get the Backstage Pass, you also get an opportunity to Megan's bonus gift. Plus, it's also that no stress plan of being able to do this 5-day program because you have that worry-free access so that you don't miss a thing, and you don't actually have to wait either. You can get everything all at once. So it's an amazing deal, and when you think about it, it's another burnout solution because you don't have to stress or worry or wait for any of this game-changing content. And lastly, instead of burning the candle at both ends, let your light burn brightly, knowing that you're more than enough. Most importantly, you create your own burnout solution, and you don't have to do it alone. So I'll see you at the next awesome interview, and I will see you today in our Facebook group where I will be answering your questions and also giving you my crib notes from this awesome interview. So thanks, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.